two, one, two, three.
Hello, and welcome to DSA Presents. My guest today is Jorge DeFendini, who is a Cornell senior, a fellow member of Ithaca DSA, and the newest member of Common Council representing the 4th Ward of Ithaca. So Jorge, why don't we start by you talking about who you are and what made you want to run for Common Council?
Sure thing. Thank you all so much for having me. I really do appreciate this opportunity to talk to my comrades about things that are happening and are the different parts that we can play. But yeah, so a little background on myself. My name is Jorge DeFendini. I am now 22 years old and the newest member, as you said, of the Ithaca Common Council. I ran as a part of the Solidarity Slate, which was a slate of 3 self-described socialists running on a shared platform that included things regarding housing policy, climate change action, criminal justice, different ways how we can help the community with a very progressively oriented vision in mind. And this Solidarity Slate was put together by a bunch of different groups coming together, including Ithaca DSA, the Ithaca Tenants Union, the Working Families Party, and so on and so forth. They helped craft the platform that then people like myself and my fellow slate mates, Phoebe Brown and Maddie Halpert, decided we were going to be the delegates to carry on, and that we would be functioning as sort of the pole bearers of the policies and the movement, frankly, of these organizations. And so the way that I got involved was I was first asked by members of the Solidarity Slate to help try and find somebody who could run in Ward 4, the ward I represent now, which is College Town for the most part. Surprised to say that there are not many college students who want to run for office really anywhere, especially in Ithaca. But I had done some organizing in the past. I was a campus corps leader, part of the National Students for Bernie program the previous year. And after the primary didn't go so well, I decided to work with my fellow organizers, and we retrofitted that group to become Cornell Progressives, which is still the foremost and largest progressive leftist organization on Cornell campus right now. And I was working to try and find students who would be interested in running for Ward 4 or residents. And after a couple of weeks of not being able to find somebody, they finally asked me if I would be interested in doing it. And at this point in my life, I wasn't really interested in elected office. I was much more interested in field organizing and doing field work, which I had been doing since I was 18 in different political campaigns. But after talking about it with some friends, with advisors and mentors and family, I decided to go for it. And I figured that this is a movement that is people-based and is very collective in nature. And we all have different skills and assets that we can bring to it. And if this is the way I can plug in as a delegate and representative of a shared platform, then that's how I want to be of the most use.
Okay, and what, so you were out campaigning, and I imagine you were doing a lot of door-to-door, direct talking to people. What were you hearing? What were their concerns?
So yeah, when I was once I got involved with the Solidarity Slate, I did a lot of canvassing in Ward 4, because even though, Ithaca is a very liberal, left-leaning city, you don't want to take anything for granted. And at the time, I did have an independent challenger in the general election who announced his candidacy alongside a very prompt endorsement by the local police union, which frankly was not that surprising given that our platform had come out in favor of reallocating police funding towards different community projects and whatnot. But this prompted me. I wanted to make sure that we were talking to as many people as we can and making sure that people knew about the Solidarity Slate, about our different approach to politics. And a lot of people, big issues for them was the concern of housing availability, of rising rents. The eviction moratorium was still in place at the time, and but people were concerned that landlords were going to start raising rents if they couldn't collect to make up for former losses. People were concerned about kitchen table issues, including infrastructure. Like most of the sidewalks in Ithaca have some level of disrepair. The roads are shoddy. In particular, in College Town, there's the infamous Stewart Avenue, which is a combination of asphalt and cobblestone. And it's a nightmare for anyone driving on it, whether you're a college student or a longtime resident. And so a lot of people felt that the basic functions of city government, whether they would be, protecting tenant rights or making sure that our roads work, were not being met. And so I wanted to take approach and be like, these are things we have so much money for new development projects to create housing that nobody can afford except for, a bunch of trust fund students or nonprofit CEOs or directors, and then we're also spending thousands of dollars on a militarized police department. This is money that could be used to fix the roads, to provide better public transport, and to provide rent relief. But we're not choosing to do that, and so we need a new approach to how we run city government, and that's what the Solidarity Slate is pitching its voters, and that's what we talked about.
Did you run into much of a difference in issues and priorities between college students and non-college residents, more long-term residents?
Not really. That's one of the interesting things about it. I mean, Ithaca, rightfully so, there is a bit of a divide or a rift between the college student population and the locals and the people who are long-term residents here. But to that, I say that while there are many, there's definitely, justifiable, resentment or tensions between the groups because of how the city chooses to prioritize, specific populations and the people who make the city the most money. But there's a lot more that unites these two different groups than divides it. And I'm focused, and the Solidarity Slate is focused on trying to make sure that, we focus on those bridge issues, as I call them. So keeping rents down, rent prices down, and keeping tenant protections up is something that whether you're a resident of Ithaca or a long-term resident of Ithaca or a college student, that's something that you agree on unanimously. Because Ithaca is 70% renters. Only 30% of the city are people who own their homes, if that.
And just to put that in perspective for people nationwide, the figure is about 66% homeowners and 34% renters. So we're almost completely reversed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's very, present. I've heard my new coworkers on the council have been on the record in the past of saying that Ithaca is a landlord economy. Now, to that, I would say Ithaca is a renter economy. It's a tenant economy. And I think that's indicative of, where city council, common council is at right now. And so we need to start, reshifting that narrative so that we are prioritizing the people who make this economy run, and that's tenants. And so we need to start reflecting that with our policies. And so focusing on those wedge issues like tenant protections, housing policy, and infrastructure. I mean, whether you're a college student or you're a long-term resident, like you hate the roads, you're upset that you trip on the sidewalk when you walk outside the house. And these are things that everybody cares about. And it's just a fact. And the reason that we can't move forward on them is because we are choosing to misprioritize the city's priorities. And so we need to reshift that. And that's what the Solidarity Slate is trying to do.
So I want to dive down a little more on the issues, but before that, I just wanted to ask you, did you run into any resistance because you were running openly as a socialist? How did people respond to that?
I don't think there was a big backlash to that. Ithaca is a fairly liberal and progressive city. Now, of course, we know that liberal and progressive do not mean socialist, and there are definitely people who who see that, moniker and think, oh boy, here come the loud, chest puffing activists who are all talk and no action. And there's always going to be that group, but they represent the vast minority. And I feel this was reflective in our canvassing strategy. Whatever labels you might ascribe to socialist, progressive, liberal, what have you, most of those disappear once you're knocking on somebody's door and you're having a conversation and you're met with somebody like myself or one of the amazing organizers and canvassers that were on the Solidarity Slate. When they're listening and they're hearing that, what your concerns are, and then they're telling you that much of our priorities align with that, like this socialist who you've heard these things about wants to fix the roads, and this socialist wants to keep public safety up and wants to make sure that you get to stay in your home if you've done nothing wrong as a tenant. Once we start making those relationships and those connections, a lot of the stereotypes or preconceived biases sort of dissipate and float away. And so I'm very glad to see that, I'm of the belief, and this might be a bit of extreme, but I think that the biggest solution to all of our answers is to organize. Always be organizing is what I say. And if there is a bad perception or stereotype or slandering of the socialist label or people who identify as socialists, you answer that by organizing people and talking to them and showing them what exactly a socialist is about. And this is somebody who believes in putting humanity and people over profits. And once we establish those connections, I think any fear or anxieties about that dissipated.
Okay, so let's talk about action. In terms of housing, what can Common Council do? What can you push in your new role?
Right. So there are a couple things that we are taking very seriously. The Solidarity Slate is absolutely of the belief that housing is a human right. And for me, the end goal of this is I don't believe that you can believe in housing as a human right and believe in the commodity of housing. And so the end game, the end step for us is ultimately, ideally the decommodification of that. But in the meantime, we can do a lot of progressive reforms that protect the people in a renting economy. So a couple of those include, we are right now pushing hard for the right to renew leases. This is Ithaca's good cause eviction. There's a fight happening in the state, in the assembly right now, and we're looking forward to seeing that and hoping that that momentum might give us the push that we need to get this law on the books. It's a very commonplace, simple law that states if you've done nothing wrong, if you follow your contract as a good tenant, your landlord needs to give you the opportunity to renew your lease, and they cannot use other types of soft powers to subtly evict you, whether it's not giving you the option to renew your lease or trying to increase the rent so that you can no longer pay for it. They can still get that rent in small claims court, but that cannot be a non-payment of a rapidly increased rent is not a form of is not grounds for eviction under this law. So basically, all this law is stating is that if you've been a good tenant who's followed the rules of your contract, you should have a right to stay in your house. And so it shifts the burden of proof for eviction onto the landlord and away from the tenant, who already enjoys a very skewed power dynamic in the landlord-tenant relationship. So that's one of the first things that we're trying to do, and we're trying to get it done rather soon. Beyond that, we're also big supporters of things like the right to counsel. We want to take a look at, where Ithaca stands on the right to counsel for tenants who are in the process of being evicted in eviction courts. I believe right now that I believe we have a law on the books right now, but I don't know how much teeth exists inside this law and how much it's really delivering for people, if it has the necessary funding to provide those tenants with representation or not. And I'm much supportive of the law that exists at the state level so that we can try and make ours reflect that and provide some serious protections for tenants. And then beyond that, in housing, we also want to talk about zoning reform. We want to make sure that we have inclusionary zoning for all of our development projects. Ithaca loves development, and I think we are of the belief that if you're going to be building, new housing stock in Ithaca, we have to make sure that it's affordable for people. We're not just going to be building, luxury condos or luxury apartments that nobody but the latest Cornell trust fund student can afford.
And giving them tax subsidies to build those
100%
structures.
Absolutely.
Okay, for those of you who might just have tuned in, I'm talking with Jorge DeFendini, newest council member from the 4th Ward of Ithaca. Let's talk about law enforcement and public safety that you've identified as another issue.
Mhm. Yeah. So some of the things that we want to talk about with public safety is we are of the belief that for a very long time now, we've had a very reactive approach to public safety and to law enforcement and crime. So when we see crimes happen, when we see crimes are on the rise, this country has a typical gut reaction to meet it with more police, more punishment, more militarization, more contracts for local police departments and the Department of Defense, these types of things. Whereas we're of the belief that if you want to really be serious about stopping crime and keeping our city safe, as we all want to do, let's get proactive about it. Let's prevent crime from happening before it does. And to do that, that requires looking at what crime is, and crime is a symptom of a greater illness. That illness is typically a lack of resources, whether it's a lack to mental health resources, if people have access to hospitals, or to the drugs they may need at a pharmacy. Do they have, are they having their foods met? We're talking about like theft and robbery here. Some of the biggest typical foods that or things that are stolen from stores is baby food, is baby formula. It's food for families. That these are the type of things that are being stolen. And when people do these crimes of desperation, I don't think our initial response should be, okay, we need to throw this person in a cell and lock away the key. I think we as a city and as a city government need to talk about how we can make sure that these things don't happen, and that the people who are our neighbors aren't put in these situations where they have to choose whether they're going to be a law-abiding citizen or somebody who's going to eat tonight.
And you referred earlier to the militarization of the police and the size of the budget. Can you talk a little more about that?
Absolutely. And I think a good example of this happened in our first Common Council meeting this past Wednesday. Myself and my fellow Slate member, Phoebe Brown, voted no on a capital project funding that would have funded a bunch of different projects that I'm all in favor for. It's stuff for line a rink, for parks and infrastructure. I think those are all good things. But part of it was also allowing the city to borrow money for $280,500 of worth of new patrol vehicles. And when we asked the people with information about this as to why we're doing this, they say, oh, well, we need to renew the city's police patrol vehicles because after 5 years, they start getting battered up. And so we have to buy new ones. And because we figured that it costs less money to buy new vehicles, brand new state-of-the-art patrol vehicles, rather than do maintenance. And I personally find this to be silly and ridiculous and a misuse of city powers and city funds. And so on top of that, look at where the city budget is right now. They have the fleet of patrol cars that are state of the art with so much money that often find themselves sitting in the parking lot across from the police station. They don't see much action. And then of course we have our SWAT truck, our SWAT vehicle that isn't really used besides to do crowd control protests and whatnot. And this is a weapon of war. This is like a weapon of militarized war that could be serving a much better purpose than to terrorize or instill fear, order through fear in the city. And so, talking about trying to repurpose that as like a mobile medical clinic is one thing that we've talked about in the Solidarity Slate. But just using the monies that were used to do the upkeep and maintenance and upgrades for it, and like things like the SWAT team or the latest state-of-the-art patrol car, to, I don't know, fund the busing systems here so that we don't have to spend so much on it, or do a rideshare program where the city runs a taxi or rideshare program at a deficit so that people have easy access to a rideshare program to get to the grocery store or to get to the hospital if they can't afford an ambulance. I think these are things that are, make much more sense for public safety than the latest toys from the Department of Defense that we'll be using to target our marginalized communities.
Okay. And in terms of other issues, I mean, you talked about infrastructure, and other than tying that to the budget and the priorities of the budget, are there other things that you want to say about infrastructure needs?
Yeah, I mean, beyond the budget and whatnot, I think just looking at the state of decay in the city, where we have I remember canvassing late at night, and I remember, if I wasn't paying attention and watching where I was going, tripping. And I'm at the time I was 21 years old, and I'm only a year older now, and I have control of my senses. I'm rather young, and I'm able to catch myself afterwards. But if I'm not paying attention, or if you're under the influence or inebriated or whatnot, you could really hurt yourself. If you're older, if you don't have complete control of your body and stuff like that, you could hurt yourself. If you're disabled, it's almost impossible to get through parts of the city because of how in disrepair our sidewalks are. And then for roads, if we're talking about tying it back to public safety, traffic stops for people who are speeding, let's add some more speed bumps instead. And make sure that we have, people are sort of self-regulating without having to have a horrible interaction with an officer. And so there are basic kitchen table issues regarding infrastructure that impact our most marginalized people, who are either elderly, disabled, or whatnot, that we need to start addressing, and that we're not, because again, we've misprioritized where our focus is.
Well, I'm surprised that you don't think that the pink paint on the sidewalks is an adequate solution.
Yeah.
Let's talk for a minute about Cornell and the impact of Cornell and city governments dealing with Cornell.
Yeah. So, a fellow member of Ithaca DSA, who is a professor at Cornell, Professor Russell Rickford, has stated that Ithaca is a company town, and that company is Cornell. And I think this was another thing I encountered when canvassing. We are of the belief that everybody needs to pay their fair share in Cornell, in Ithaca, whether that's the rich, and that includes, or Cornell. And so Cornell, as there's a lot of legalese that's wrapped the status and identity of Cornell, that prevents them from paying taxes, and they find different ways to contribute to the city, with programs or heavily subsidizing TCAF, for instance. But I don't believe this gives them special treatment. I don't think you giving back to your community or playing a part in the broader ecosystem of your city earns you special treatment. So this is something that would come up a lot when we were talking to canvassers. We were talking about taxing Cornell or having Cornell pay more of their fair share. Some people, with genuine intent, would say, "Oh, well, but Cornell does so much. They provide so much financial support and programs for the city. They do pay their fair share." And to that, I say, well, yeah, another person who pays their fair share is the person who collects your garbage. It's the doctor who lives down the street. It's the person who runs the bodega shops or all of our restaurants. They all pay taxes. They all provide a service to the community, and they are an integral part, where a city would not function as well if they were not here, and they still pay taxes. So I don't think providing a number of jobs or programs or even financial support for the city entitles Cornell to enjoy a privileged status amongst us. If they're going to be in the city and enjoy our population of workers, and the other facet, then they need to pay their fair share as well.
Okay, before we talk about the politics of the situation and how you see yourself and your ideas succeeding, are there other issues that you want to talk about?
Briefly, I'll talk about a little bit about climate. We take, climate seriously. I'm on the younger side, and I believe that climate change is the fight of our generation. And so we need to be really serious about it. And I know that Ithaca is a progressive town. We have an Ithaca Green New Deal, and it's a lot of great and wonderful language and writing, but we need to start giving it some teeth and providing some, backbone to it. I know there are wonderful people working within the city right now, including Luis Torres. He's done a remarkable job so far on trying to give the Green New Deal the money to support its programs and stuff like that. I support a lot of what he's talking about doing. trying to make sure that we retrofit our houses so that they are carbon neutral, retrofit our buildings, and doing this at low to no cost for much of Ithaca. These are things I greatly support. I think public transport, transit needs to re-enter the conversation. There's a lot of people who have cars and who do a lot of driving here in the city. We need to start making it so that we have completely free, completely subsidized transit with expanded stops, expanded and more frequent traveling of the buses, hiring more bus drivers so that more people can enjoy public transit and that we are watching our carbon footprint on an individual basis a lot better. And this all connects to things like having a walkable city. People are more inclined to walk to work or walk to the store if they know the sidewalks aren't in disarray rather than take a car. So these are all interconnected issues. And so the Ithaca Green New Deal, the Green New Deal for me has always been understanding that we need to pursue, if we're going to pursue economic development or reforms to our economy, it cannot be at the expense of fighting climate change. These need to be integrated and married together. If we're going to create more jobs, they're going to be union jobs, but they're going to be green jobs as well.
Okay, we're getting close on time, but you referred to a 10-2 vote at your first council meeting. So how do you see yourself and Phoebe winning over other council members?
Right. Well, I'm going to, speaking on my part, is I'm going to be taking the mindset that I've had about politics since I was 18, and I'm going to be taking an organizer's mindset. So if we need the votes, we need to go out and organize for them. And that's a two-front war. So that's myself and Miss Phoebe. We're going to be talking to our colleagues to get them to support us on our legislation and our policy. And then that's going to be working with our comrades in DSA, our comrades in ITU and WFP, who are in the greater public, and having them, apply pressure as they see fit, and who are working in tandem with them and making sure that we are crafting this policy together. And a good example of this was when we were talking about crafting the right to renew leases. We had one a town hall or a public hearing where we invited members of the community to provide input. And we use that input to tweak the law so that it's more reflective of what people want. And so that's the type of example of a two-front war where we're going to be having, ordinary citizens apply pressure and have their needs, heard and spoken. And then myself and Miss Phoebe will be providing that extra pressure and organizing on the inside. But the good news is
I have to cut you off there because we're just about out of time. We've been talking to Jorge DeFendini about his future on Common Council. You've been watching DSA Presents. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 3.